Welcome to this week's episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. On this week's episode, we look into why Hamas is terrified. Let's get started. I've been receiving a lot of messages from followers trying to get my insights and updates on what's been going on for the last week. As many of you who follow the news might already know, this ceasefire that had been negotiated over a month ago has officially run out. So therefore, there were no more hostages being released, and what was supposed to be phase 2, unfortunately, hasn't even been negotiated yet. So we have this somewhat of a stalemate, and many people are wondering what's next. So as a way of hopefully getting my listeners a little more up to date on what's been going on, if you don't follow some of the news, we're going to catch up on a few things and talk about maybe what's going to come next. I know that this can sometimes be very confusing for people who maybe haven't dealt with this before. And to be honest, this is in a little way unusual because typically in other circumstances, Israel's been forced into these ceasefires that has allowed Hamas to rebuild and attack Israel all over again in a few years. So this is actually pretty unique that we are in this stalemate. And with this very unique situation, there's been some very unique ideas being put out. Initially, at the point where the ceasefire was coming to an end, and clearly phase 2 was not negotiated, the United States sent their negotiator, Steve Witkoff, to the region in order to maybe try and broker some type of temporary plan. And what is now known as the Witkoff plan was suggesting that phase 1 of this ceasefire could continue with the provisions that more hostages are released and Israel continues to send aid into Gaza. So it's somewhat of a status quo. We'll just continue to do the thing we've been doing, and then we can negotiate the next steps in phase 2. But for the time being, the people of Gaza get their aid, and the people of Israel get their hostages back. It seems pretty common sense. It doesn't seem that unusual to suggest, why don't we all continue to do the things that we all technically agreed to already? But the only problem is, Israel agreed to it, and Hamas didn't. And the reason I believe that Hamas didn't agree to this is because Hamas is scared. Hamas knows that the hostages that they currently hold are the only thing keeping them alive and in power. If those hostages are somehow taken out of the equation, they really have no other bargaining chip. So the reason why they turned down the Witkoff plan is because the Witkoff plan made sure that they had to give up half of the hostages now, and then half of the hostages upon the finalizing of phase 2. And Hamas can't have that. Hamas can't be left without these hostages. So there's no way they're going to agree to that. So Israel is left with, what do we do now? Israel, in order to get back to war, because that's what happens when you don't have a ceasefire anymore, started to call up many of their soldiers and started to prepare to go back to war. This undoubtedly scared the crap out of Hamas. And it didn't help Hamas that the hostages that were released from Hamas custody in Gaza happened to be in Washington speaking to the President of the United States. And in that same meeting, he apparently tweeted one of the most direct threats against Hamas that we've ever seen. He wrote essentially, you better release the hostages now, all of them, or else hell will be paid. And as much as Hamas likes to pretend that they're so great, they are probably pretty scared right now. What used to be a U.S. government that was supportive of them, would push back on Israel any chance they get. They used to have Hezbollah and Iran on their side, so nobody would try and threaten them like Trump and the U.S. has done. But those people are essentially all wiped out. The only people they have left, and they actually made a call recently, begging the Houthis to start firing on Israel again. We'll see if that happens. But I hate to say that calling up the Houthis and asking for their help kind of shows the poor situation that you're in, that's all you have left on your side. So in the message from Trump, he made it very clear that Israel, if they don't get their hostages back, can go back to war. There's no ceasefire anymore, and they can literally do whatever they need to do to get them back. He said very clearly he will supply them with anything and everything they need in order to destroy Hamas. and suggested that now's the time to release them and get out of there before it's too late. And in a move that seems pretty typical of Hamas and really shows how they feel and how scared they are, they immediately released a statement, an official statement, that if anybody tries to attack Hamas, they will kill all of the hostages that are alive. You can see the desperation in what they're saying. They know that they are screwed. They know they are in trouble. They know the IDF is sitting there and waiting to go in. The only last-ditch effort they can do is threaten the hostages' lives. If you come close, we will kill them. That is the only way to keep Israel at bay. Will it work? I don't know. But it really does show how pathetic and weak and scared they are. They used to feel like they could say anything and do anything. They were strong and powerful, and people trembled when they made threats. And now they're essentially as weak as they've ever been. And no doubt, the Israelis actually changing the script a little bit here and cutting off aid fully to Gaza, in addition to recently, as of today, cutting off electricity, which, by the way, they only supply a tiny bit of electricity. They still have some, but Israel is no longer going to play the game of sending in aid, food, medicine, and support for the people who are still fighting and holding hostages. I posted on our Instagram not that long ago a really funny point where we are installing, finally, the Gutierrez plan for Gaza. The Gutierrez plan takes the name from Secretary General Gutierrez, who decided that when a couple of his people from the United Nations were kidnapped by Houthi rebels, his first reaction is to tell his organization to stop all aid to all of Yemen until the hostages are returned. The funny thing is, that same Secretary General has been claiming that we need to be sending stuff into Gaza for months now, with way more hostages. The hypocrisy would be laughable if it wasn't just so crazy that he himself is saying to cut all aid to an entire country that is actually in a famine because of a few of his people taken by terrorists. Meanwhile, after October 7th, when there's not a famine, Israel needs to be continuing to send aid and stuff into Gaza to Hamas to use when they know they're stealing it. The double standard and hypocrisy is pretty obvious. So following the lead of the United Nations, who of course is a moral authority, Israel decided, once the ceasefire was done, that required them to continue to give aid, there's no need to give aid anymore. So Israel has now stopped sending aid into Gaza and electricity. And this is hopes to put more pressure on Hamas. So on the one hand, we see that the Hamas leadership is kind of in trouble and scared. They have no protection from Iran, from Hezbollah, from Syria anymore. And on the other hand, you have Trump's Gaza plan, which we spoke about on a previous episode, talking about how he plans on removing all or most of the people from Gaza, either temporarily or permanently, leaving them to try and fight an Israeli army without human shields, which kind of goes against all of their fighting styles. Their fighting style is only successful with human shields, and with real or fake dead bodies for the media. Hollywood doesn't work without the fake dead bodies. So the Trump plan looming over is a very scary thought for not only Hamas, but for the Arab world. So meanwhile, as Hamas realizes they have no support anymore, and it's possible that their people being kicked out is kind of imminent, the Arab world isn't really coming to the rescue either. Following the Trump Gaza plan, the Arab world outwardly said they would not listen to Trump's plan and they would not take a single person from Gaza. But with the pressure of this plan looming, they decided they had to gather together, the Arab League, and come up with their own Gaza plan, since it was either Trump's plan or something else. We did talk about this a little bit on a previous episode. If you want to go back and listen, I'll give you more insights there. And this week, the much anticipated Arab League plan for Gaza finally came out. And to nobody's surprise, guess what? The Arabs don't want the Palestinian Arabs in Gaza. Egypt doesn't want them. Jordan doesn't want them. Nobody wants them. So their plan is simply to not move the people, to create a functional government of soldiers from different Arab countries in order to maintain civility. But funny enough, do you know who isn't mentioned in this entire plan? Hamas. Hamas isn't mentioned once by the Arab League. I wonder why. Do they support Hamas? Do they want to keep Hamas there? Is this all a plan to make sure they stay in power? There is a vague allusion to the idea that armed groups who live in Gaza will be taken care of through the, quote, political process. Whatever the hell that means. Maybe that means eventually Hamas will get back into power like they did in 2006, when they won an election and then started a civil war, killing their opponents and seizing the entirety of Gaza. They talk about how the Gazans will stay exactly where they are, and how the Arab countries will give them tons of money to repair, so that way they can feel a little bit better about not helping the Gazans. But not a single person is going to be leaving Gaza, according to their plan. I guess those hundreds of thousands of Gazans who signed up to leave the country are just shit out of luck, thanks to the Arab countries and their wonderful plan for the Gazan people. Needless to say, this is not sufficient for Israel, not sufficient for the United States, and again, we are in a stalemate. We have the American plan on the one hand, and we have the Arab League plan on the other. We don't really know what's happening right now. We are in an uncharted territory. We've got these two vastly different plans, neither of which are agreed to by both sides, and if something isn't dealt with, a very quick looming war. We are going to have the Israelis go back into Gaza and finally finish the job they were supposed to finish. But of course that comes at the risk of losing hostages, because if Hamas is telling the truth, and we do know that they have killed hostages before, it is very possible that we might lose some of those hostages. On the other hand, we really can't trust Hamas to do anything, especially when you are like a caged animal, like Hamas is right now, with nowhere else to turn. I'd use this analogy with one of our followers, where Hamas members are kind of like a scammer you'd get on the telephone or by email, when they tell you that something's been compromised and you send us $100 and we'll fix whatever's wrong with your computer, whatever virus we've given you, if they've locked you out of your computer, whatever extortion they're trying to do, don't worry, just send us $100 and we'll fix it. And some people, unfortunately, by the way, don't do this, will send the $100 to them saying, you know what, it's just $100, I'll get all my stuff back, they'll fix my computer, whatever, and then you send them the $100. But then meanwhile, you're dealing with scammers, or in the case of Hamas, terrorists. So how do you know they will actually fulfill their end of the bargain? So when you send that $100 to that scammer, all of a sudden they say, you know what? Actually, it's $200 now. Pay us and we'll fix your computer or do whatever we need to do. And then if you're stupid enough to pay the $200, all of a sudden it becomes $400. It is really difficult to make deals with terrorists or scammers and expect them to be legitimate and do what they say. And Israel is unfortunately held to that weird standard of, do we make a deal and hope they're actually going to live up to it? What assurances do we have that they will live up to that? How much longer are we going to allow Hamas to use this delay tactic in order to try to get away with prolonging their existence? And the answer really is, I don't know. Thank goodness I am not the head of that country that has to deal with these very difficult situations. I don't have to deal with the hostage families and trying to explain that we need to go to war in order to get them back if that possibly risks their lives. It really is a very difficult situation. In the end, you could see that Hamas is turned into a rabid dog in a cage with nowhere else to turn. They have lost all of their support pretty much from around the world. We've even seen within the North American sphere, governments finally taking action, arresting, deporting, cutting off funding ties to Hamas. The empire is slowly crumbling. And we also see that Israel is no longer playing the typical game of sending in aid and hoping that they'll stop being terrorists and give us back our people. Israel is starting to finally play hardball. And it does help that we have people on our side in different governments who are willing not to get in our way anymore. But one thing couldn't be more clear, which is the actions of Hamas show a group of people who are literally terrified. They see the end is near, they have nowhere else to turn, they have no more allies, and their time is up. And the only thing they think they can do is maybe kill or threaten to kill hostages. That's the only way. For any of my listeners who are listening to this and trying to think, do I want to be hopeful, or should I be angry, or sad, or scared? I feel the same things you do. At this point, this is somewhat uncharted territories. But the fact that Hamas is so clearly scared, the way that they're acting is like someone who is running out of options, proves that we are on the right track. That at minimum, Hamas is scared and knows that their days are numbered. No matter what their PR and useful idiots like to pretend is the case, you can see by their actions what the real situation is. Hopefully soon we'll see the actual fruits of all of this effort, that Hamas will either leave the area, or, if we have to, we'll help them leave this earth. This has been another episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. Don't forget to check us out on social media at jdr.podcast and check out some of our other episodes on your favorite podcast source. We'll see you next time.